Good afternoon to everybody who's tuning in, and hello to those who are tuning in after the fact. I'm Kevin Addix, Director of the Maryland Wineries Association, and again, thrilled to have another great guest here. It's Maryland Wine Month, which means all this month we're celebrating what's great about Maryland wine, what's great about local wine, and talking about some interesting topics. So first up, we're going to talk with Regina Mccarthy. Regina is an old friend of mine personally. Used to work with the Maryland Wineries Association, and went off and wrote a book, The History of Maryland Wine, a full-bodied history, right? Maryland Wine, a full-bodied history. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be joining you today.
And I appreciate that. And you're also Director of Client Services at Vineyards at Doden, which is one of our premier wineries in the state in Anne Arundel County. So if you haven't been there, go there. If you're not part of the wine club, join it. Just because the wines are fantastic and you get to see Regina when you pick up your wines.
Yeah, we always love having folks out for a visit, and it's getting to be that time of year where vineyard visits are beautiful and the weather is warm. So I know we're all excited to host visitors.
So before we jump in, so we have this whole hosting of visitors. The governor has now canceled the prohibitions on indoor and outdoor activity. What changes with Vineyards at Doden now that you can have people?
Yeah, so we are following a really entirely outdoor model at Doden right now. So we are going to be hosting visitors when it's warm enough during the month of March outdoors. And then in April, we begin our official open season. So we are still practicing all of the social distancing and masking requirements that all the wineries are following right now. So we're having groups of 6 or less, tables spaced very far apart. All of our staff are Serve Safe certified for sanitation and making sure that we're offering really safe service and a comfortable environment for our guests. So yeah, it's been a big adjustment in 2020, but we've learned a lot and feel very blessed and fortunate that we have a nice open space to host people with lots of fresh air.
Yeah, Doden's great. You got tons of outdoor space, and the pavilion and the vineyards at any time of year are beautiful to see. So and we may obviously chat a little more about Doden as we go through here, but really what I want to talk about and why you're here is your book, Maryland Wine, A Full-Bodied History. So what prompted you to write this book?
Well, I was working with the industry with you, Kevin, and the association was approached about this book project, and I have, since I started working in the industry, I've always been fascinated by the stories of the winemakers in our state. Just amazing personalities and these brave spirits who have decided to take this scary, risky venture and plant grapevines and make wine in a brand new region. And it just seemed totally appropriate to tell their story and to dig back and find the origins of the industry in this state. So it was a really fun project. I got to interview all of my favorite winemakers and dig up some of the old stories about colonial vineyards and that sort of thing.
So just going back to the beginning, so colonial times, there was wine in Virginia, there was wine in Maryland. Just from what you read, researched, what did things look like back in the 1700s?
Sure.
Was there a vineyard, 5 vineyards? No.
I would say there were just kind of sprinkles up and down the mid-Atlantic, ever since folks started coming to this country. Vineyards in the mid-Atlantic, always an effort to make wine, and some of those efforts were more successful than others. The earliest record of vineyards and grape growing in Maryland was 1649. There was a man named Tennis Paley. Not much is known about him except that he planted 4 different varieties and made 8 different wines from his vineyard. Then in the 1660s, we know Lord Baltimore attempted to plant a vineyard. His success there wasn't much. He wasn't successful. There's a couple different stories about what actually happened. Sorry, I have my dog on my lap. Whether or not his vineyard was planted and failed, or if the vines never made it here. So just a couple mentions in the 1600s, and then in the 1700s, we know in 1756, Colonel Benjamin Tasker in the Bowie area of Maryland had more success with the with the Alexander grape, and then we know in the 1770s, Charles Carroll of Annapolis planted a vineyard as well. So just scatterings here and there. We do know that in the 1840s, there was an effort to really get this industry growing. There was a effort in the Maryland legislature to create the Society for the Culture of the Vine. Again, not much came from this, but they were trying to get vines in the ground to see if we could grow and make wine here and have it become a real industry.
That sounds like a cult I would want to be part of. So there was some Maryland royalty in there, colonels and governors and lords who planted grapes. When did the industry truly kick off? What was the spark that kind of got our 100+ wineries started?
Yeah, so post-Prohibition, there was a very important man in our industry named Philip Wagner. Philip Wagner was a journalist. He was a writer for the Baltimore Sun. He was making wine in his home during Prohibition. He was buddies with H.L. Mencken, and they would make wine together. He ended up in Europe working with the Baltimore Sun. And he was a correspondent, and he and his wife traveled around Europe. And the story is that they took clippings of grapevines from French vineyards where they were growing French American hybrid grapes and brought them back to Baltimore County. The legend is, as the folks at Bordy Vineyards have told me, is that they would keep the clippings alive by soaking them in the bidets overnight. So a little bit of Maryland wine folklore for you. In any case, Philip Wagner and his wife Jocelyn started a nursery where they were propagating grapevines in Baltimore County. One small project turned into a larger project. They eventually opened Bordy Vineyards in 1945. Prior to that, I should say that Philip Wagner wrote a book about the history of Maryland wine. Wrote a book about growing American wine that ended up becoming quite important for wine growers across the country. They called him the Johnny Appleseed of vineyards. So Philip Wagner and his wife Jocelyn started Bordy Vineyards. It eventually moved to the DeFord family's property in the Long Green Valley. But that winery is, as I'm sure most of the folks watching know, is still one of Maryland's premier wineries and doing amazing things for our industry.
And what I think is interesting about Philip Wagner and what the Wagner nursery and everything else is that American wine took a nod from them and actually borrowed some grapes from Philip Wagner. So I actually learned about Bordy as a Marylander who just didn't know about Bordy when I was in California touring some wineries, and I said I was from Maryland. They said, "Where do you live?" I said, Bowie, but looking at a job in Baltimore, and they said, "Oh, we got some of our vines from a nursery just north of Baltimore." And it was Bordy Vineyards, and that kind of started. It was Kenwood Vineyards, which is a big name, and they got some of their early vines and early varieties from Bordy. And I remember a story about Wagner importing tasting glasses, wine glasses.
Yeah, they one of the very famous, the old school Maryland Wine Festival, the little glass, that shape and style was a glass that he really worked with and promoted and brought here. So he had a huge influence. Even Warren Winiarski from Stag's Leap, he learned under Philip. He was one of his, I suppose, proteges. He worked with Philip a little bit here in Maryland and then went out west to then become this amazing world-renowned winemaker. So that impact is huge. One of my favorite things about their story is that they would hire farmers, so folks who were growing other agricultural products and say, hey, would you mind planting an acre of this or an acre of that grape variety for me? We'll harvest it, we'll pay you for it, we'll make wine. Well, one of those farmers that they worked with was the DeFord family. So that was a really natural transition. But I just think that's so neat, that Johnny Appleseed idea, where he was getting people excited about it.
So you have Philip Wagner in 1945, with grapes and bidets. I love that story beforehand. And that was not foreshadowing the quality of Maryland wine, by the way. We are growing much better vines than those in bidets, I'm sure. But you got to start somewhere. Was there a whole lot happening between 1945 and the late 70s when things really started to kick off?
So there wasn't much happening. One of the other very notable winemakers at that time was Mowbray. He was the owner of Mowbray Cellars, and he worked with a lot of different grape varieties, but specifically Seyval Blanc. So he opened a winery in 1966. There were a handful, less than 10 other wineries that opened within the next 10 years or so. We had Linganore, a really important winery in our history, a family-owned winery that opened in 1967. They hosted the very first wine festival in the state of Maryland at their property, and still to this day, given COVID, have hosted safe large parties, large festivals to this day. There were a few other wineries that have since closed, folks like Bon Speranza, Bird, ZM. There's a company called Chesapeake Cider Company that have since closed. And then it wasn't until the 80s that we really started to see this second wave of wineries open. And that included folks like Fiori, Woodhull Wine Cellars, who else? Bassignani in the 80s. Yeah. So, and then later Elk Run and a number of other really important, what do we call those folks? Our legacy winemakers in the state.
It's funny. I always think of the folks who were around when I started and you shortly after in the industry as our legacy, because they didn't want to be called vintage or village elders or anything like that, because they're not old, but they're the brain trust, the Allens and the DeFords and the Wilsons, and you just go through that, Bassignani and the folks at Woodhull, Fiori. They're the ones that when you need to find out why something's the way it is, you call up Mike Fiori, you get a long answer. But you hear what the history is of it, and that's what I love about it.
And those folks really organized too. They started the very first Maryland Wine Festival. They got the Maryland Wineries Association up and running. They hired you. Those folks are responsible for the professionalization of the industry.
And certainly with leading the charge on quality. So we kind of set things up. There was a lot of research that happened in the late 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But we were at like 10 to 15 to 20 wineries until, the early 2000s. What sparked it then? Because now, as I said, we're over 100 now. So what led to the growth?
Gosh, that's really amazing growth in just 20 years. But, I think what happened in the early 2000s is no pun intended, the roots had really been, the vines had been planted, the roots were growing. The quality initiative really started to emerge, and we started to learn about what varieties would grow well here and what our challenges and opportunities were as a region with our many microclimates and our many terroirs and our many different soil types. And so we see folks like Black Ankle open, and we see folks in the western part of the state and on the eastern shore and up north in Baltimore County and down in southern Maryland start to, these new wineries and new vineyards start to plant varieties that we think can do well here. And we're starting to see more and more success. And the newer wineries are working with the older wineries, learning what works, learning what doesn't work, bringing in new tools and techniques and new experimentation to see what we can do to push the envelope. And so I think it's like a snowball effect where the momentum started building, more wineries started opening, and now we see that this is a real industry with real quality opportunities. It's one thing when you have 8 awesome wineries working really hard scattered around the state, but when you start building wine trails and you start to see regional influence and, oh, this actually tastes like it's grown in the western part of the state, or this tastes like it's grown in the Piedmont or on the shore, and that identity starts to emerge, I think that's where things really started to kick off.
Got to give you a little credit for starting the Maryland Wine Trail program. So I remember the Piedmont Wine Trail and the Chesapeake Wine Trail and the Frederick Wine Trail was the first that came forward and launched. And of course, you needed a concentration of wineries to do that. You couldn't do that when we had 10 wineries scattered around the state. But when you airdropped into Frederick, along that 26, 27 corridor, and you had Low and Black Ankle and Linganore and Elk Run and going around there, you all of a sudden you have a wine trail. Somebody said to me the other day, you've got the old guard, is what someone said about that original 10 to 15, and then you got the ABCs. And I said, what are the ABCs? And they said places like Antietam Creek and All the Bees, Bordelot and Big Cork, and on and on and on. Black Ankle you mentioned, and then the C's, Catoctin Breeze and Crow. These folks who were bringing in. And there's a big focus on Barbera, for example, which did not exist. We were largely a Bordeaux plus Chambourcin and Vidal and Céval industry. What do you think about this diversity of grape varieties? Just not talking necessarily about history for a moment, but you've worked in the distribution and larger wine industry. What do you think about the fact that we've got over 30 varieties prominently poured in the state?
I think it's exactly where we need to be. I get this question a lot from folks who come to visit us at the vineyard. And I think because, we're such a small state, but, Kevin, when I started working with you, you had to drive 2 hours to get from one winery to another.
And we did that a lot.
And you're driving over the Chesapeake Bay, or you're driving 2 mountains, you're really traversing varied landscapes. And because it is such a diverse state, I think we need to be doing that experimentation where we're trying to grow Albarino, we're growing Sangiovese, we're growing Sauvignon Blanc, and seeing what works well where. I think we're too young as an industry to know what our grape is going to be. And I think in our maturity, whenever that is, we're going to know what are the top 3 grapes from the Piedmont? What are the top 3 grapes from the Western Shore uplands? What are the top 3 grapes from, Allegheny County? And how do our farming practices influence which of those grapes that we can grow in different places? So I see this phase in our industry as just exploration and trial and error. And I think it's really important that we're growing all of these different things. And it is a huge gift from a consumer perspective, because I get to drink Maryland Albarino and Maryland Sangiovese. Like, there's something for everyone, which makes the consumption and the enjoyment side so much fun because there's so much diversity.
I can tell you, it makes our competitions, and anytime we're tasting wines for our Wine Explorer Club or something like that, the fact that we've got so many different options, and it, I remember when the first Barbera was produced, and well, it's interesting, does this have a future here? And now there's like 9 or 10 every year, and it's so exciting to be able to taste that. What do you think? We talked about some history. What do you think the future holds?
Yeah.
Where are things going to go with what you're working in the industry now? What are you seeing working within the industry?
So I think one of the really fun things that I look forward to is the learning about the different winemaking styles that are to come, because we have so many winemakers now who are all doing things in unique ways where we can experience something like Barbera, for example, as a rosé or as a very, you know, austere or serious table wine, that, or an age-worthy Cabernet Sauvignon. You know, we're now learning about um, how our stylistic impact can affect that wine as well. So I'm excited to see those styles continue to emerge. You know, I think now we're at a critical mass of quality producers and folks who are really concerned about their farming practices and their cellar technique, in a way where they want to take it to that next level. So we're able to attract world-class consultants, winemaking consultants from around the world, who can bring even more knowledge to our region. So, and with how, because of Zoom and the internet and how, you know, everything global has really become so much closer to us, we are in a position now where we can learn from our colleagues across the country or across the world. So I think we're going to see this rapid increase in quality and in wine style, in terms of number of styles of wine. So I'm excited to see where that goes. I think, you know, it's wild because I consider myself, you know, an industry insider. I know so many of these wineries. I can't keep up with all the new wineries, and that's like a really good sign that it's just going to keep going. I really look forward to seeing our amazing restaurants and chefs continue to embrace our wine industry and our local cider and brewery industry and our distilling industry. Seeing that collaboration, you know, thank God our restaurants are going to be able to get back on their feet and really do amazing business this year. But seeing that synergy with our local farmers, our local beef farmers and our local dairy farmers and our local turnip farmers and our local grape farmers all together. I mean, that's, to me, the very best part of it, is eating food that's grown near, you know, the vineyards is really, really fun.
I just missed a call from Mark Eamon from St. Michael's Winery, and it jogged my memory that St. Michael's was the first one that I know of that had a Chardonnay Seyval blend. Do you remember that? It was I think it was Long Splice.
Yes,
was the name of it?
I love that wine.
It was a great wine, and it, you know, that era, that kind of in between, when we had Cove Point putting out the first Blaufränkisch with Maryland fruit, and of course St. Michael's was using Bill Kirby's fruit. You know, that's the history coming in here, and we're seeing that now, where you've got Red Heifer doing their best to make Blaufränkisch a household name. That's great. You don't see other industries doing that. You mentioned the assortment, the variety of grapes, and then also the connection to other local products. What do you think the industry should be doing? If you could wave a magic wand and have every winery do something, what would that one thing be? How's that for a trick question?
Really good question. If I could see all the wineries do one thing, gosh, I don't know. You know, I think one of the things I've always cherished about living in a wine region, which I'm proud to say,
it's nice to
I
say that,
live
right?
in a wine region. And it was still a wine region when you had to drive 2 hours to get to a winery. But we have this access to cellars and to winemakers and to grape growers, where we can really ask questions and walk into a winery with permission and touch a wine barrel and ask why we're farming the way we're farming, and ask why we're choosing the barrels that we're choosing, and why we're letting the grapes sit on their skins for X amount of days. So I think one thing I really would love to see across the board is that consumer access and education. Wine can be so overwhelming when you're learning about it, or as you start to learn about it. But at the end of the day, we're grape growers, we're farmers, and we're small producers. And to be able to connect with our customers and our community, it's really how I think about it, in a way where we can share what we're doing and share the culture, that we're living. I think that's what I would like to see across the board. And so many of the wineries in the state do such a good job at that. But as a consumer, to be able to really, get your hands dirty, to say, and to learn about what's happening at your local farm, I think that would be my wish.
Couple of quick questions. What is your favorite grape?
Oh, I can't pick.
Oh, come on. It can be your favorite grape right now. How about that?
Okay. I'm going to say Chardonnay, because I really love sparkling Chardonnay.
Oh.
I really love all sparkling wine, but Chardonnay is so diverse. Like if I could only have one grape on a desert island for the rest of my life, it would be Chardonnay, because I could have a sparkling wine, I could have a really clean, crisp Chardonnay, and I could have a big, lush, barrel fermented, malolactic fermentation Chardonnay.
I still think back to the send off with Jade, our former staffer, with fried chicken and sparkling wine.
Favorite pairing till the
best
day
pairing
I die.
on earth. Best pairing on earth. All right, so favorite grape right now, Chardonnay. Favorite style?
Lean, crisp, mineral driven.
We have a couple. We had Catoctin Breeze on last week, Adam from Catoctin Breeze, and he was talking about his barrel fermentation. So they're putting reds with skins, whole berry fermentation in barrel. Do you see that type of experimentation, that type of we're going to try this, we're going to do that, we're going to age it in bourbon barrels like Urban Winery does? Do you think that's good for the industry? Do you think that's helpful?
I think it is. I think really at the end of the day, as long as the winemaker and the winemaking team are making wine that is true to them and to what they want and expresses their style, I think it's all good. There's a wine for every palate. There's a style for every palate. So I think those sorts of experimentation, that sort of experiment is a good thing. I always worry when, it's, the big story about California wines or New World wines, when they tried to make wine for the critics. I never think that's a healthy direction, because you want to see wines from a place that are of that place, and that's not only the farm where they're grown, but the winemaking team style. So I think it's awesome, so long as it's authentic.
Authentic. Well, and that came up. We've had some prominent wine writers and reviewers come through in recent years, and authentic came up a lot. And the question, and by the way, the punchline is lots of 90+ point reviews, which is great. Which anywhere in the world, any winemaker in the world would be ecstatic, and we are even more exuberant now that, or with us being in Maryland, not a internationally recognized until then winemaking region. But that the question of authentic, like doing something that is from here, how important is that?
Well, I think from here can mean a lot of things. It can mean Old Bay, but it can also mean from that, like I said, that winemaker's perspective. Like the funny close to home example of this from an authenticity perspective is that when I started working at Doden, I had sold wines from around the world, and there's a very clear pattern of wines from Bordeaux are bottled in high shouldered, Bordeaux shaped bottles, and wines from Burgundy have lower shoulders. And then you see that repeated around the world depending on the wine style. And I got to Doden, and we're making wines like our Dungannon or Orinoco that are Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc based wines, Merlot based wines. And they were bottled in Burgundy shaped barrels. And I was like, why would we do
You're
this?
like,
Why are
time out. What's going on?
We're breaking tradition. And Tom, the winemaker, said, "Oh, I just like them." And so I thought, okay, I can work with that. This is an authentic style decision from that person, from that place. So, I think one of the really cool things about making wine in America is that we're not beholden to a certain set of rules and parameters for what's expected and what we have to do in order to sell wines with our region's name on them. It's like the Wild West. We can put our wines in whatever shape bottle we want. We can age it in whatever vessel for as long or as short as we want to. So that is really, it's kind of fun from a winemaking perspective because we have this freedom. Yeah.
I have a question here from Jim Bachman. Were Maryland's historic wineries selling wine solely in the state, or were they conducting interstate commerce throughout the Mid-Atlantic?
That's a really good question. Most of it was here, sold in Maryland. There's a couple examples of, DC, there's some crossover, and I know Bordy Vineyards used to sell their wine in New York. But mostly it was local, direct to consumer.
So direct to consumer has expanded significantly with the onset of direct shipping. What role do you think shipping plays? The idea that in Maryland, I just checked the roster, there are 1,100 out-of-state wineries licensed to ship into Maryland.
Wow.
That's a lot. That's a lot of wine.
That's a shocking number.
It's a shocking number. What role do you think that could potentially play in getting the word out about Maryland wine?
So I think when that legislation was passed, if you had asked the member wineries, Kevin, would they have said that they were nervous or concerned about out-of-state winery shipping to residents, or were they excited about it?
Honestly, it has never come up from the industry. The industry has never expressed concern about sharing the market because the goal is always, we're better, or we've got better access to our customers. We're going to do better than some Ohio winery who can ship in. Not that that's not a great winery, but there's never been that anti-competitive spin on the manufacturer front, and that's a discussion that's happening in Annapolis right now.
Yeah.
About a lot of stuff where you have retailers and wholesalers saying, "Ooh, you should be scared. It's going to put you out of business. It's going to put us out of business." Well, it didn't put you out of business when 1,100 wineries shipped in because they're shipping in little bits to you or me. I don't recognize more than half, most of the wineries that are on there.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I see the ability to ship as it's a way for our residents to taste more interesting wines. And when we taste more interesting wines, we're more inclined to taste wines from our own backyard. I know for us at Doden, it's been a wonderful tool to be able to get wine safely, especially during COVID, to get wine safely, whether it's through our direct shipping permit or during the state of emergency, being able to deliver wine safely while checking IDs. It has opened up opportunities that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think it's very helpful across the board. And I'm not worried about those 1,100. Was it 1,100 or 11,000?
1,100.
1,100. I'm not worried about those 1,100 wineries. I'm so glad I can get wine from them, and also still support my favorite local wine shops too. And I haven't seen anybody suffer from it.
Let me ask you this. This came up the other day when I tried an amazing late harvest Petit Verdot from Big Cork Vineyards. There was a discussion about that late harvest style and ice wine. Is it true that Ham Mowbray produced the first ice wine in the U.S.?
It is true according to Ham Mowbray.
Okay, good.
While I didn't have the opportunity to meet him, I believe him. So the story goes that Ham Mowbray was reading like the Wine Spectator or one of the wine publications of the time and read about the, quote, first American-made ice wine. And he said, "Oh, no. I made the first American ice wine. I have the bottle to prove it." And he wrote a letter correcting them. So the story or the truth, I think it's the truth, is that he made the very first American ice wine. And I'm looking just at my notes to see if I can find the year, and I don't think I have it on me. But yeah, he made the first one.
I thought it was 60 something.
Yeah, it was in the 60s.
Yeah.
It was a very unusual year where there was a frost in October, and he called his buddies and said, come on, we got to pick these grapes. Yeah. We're going to press them. We're going to make this ice wine. So yes, that is a Maryland bit of legacy.
some other traditions. You know, I always like to talk about the incredible impact that Jack and Lucille Allen from Linganore had on, you know, they started with dry wines and then they jumped into fruit wines, which took off. And, you know, when I got into the industry, they were known for fruit wines. You've seen, I mean, you've been along for this ride. You've seen the evolution of Linganore, where they're now producing, I don't know if you've tried their Saperavi yet.
No.
Okay, we'll end early and get out to Mount Airy and buy the Saperavi and the sparkling Albarino and, you know, these incredible wines that they're producing, their Petit Verdot and on and on. Quite the evolution for a winery of that size.
Yeah, I get chills when I think about their story too. I mean, when they started, they worked so closely with Cornell. They planted all sorts of hybrids that they were working on at Cornell. They were like a research vineyard in addition to being a family vineyard and winery. They did so much work with Cornell. They really changed the game from a customer perspective when it came to visiting the winery. They went through, I mean, they've gone through so many decades of winemaking and wine sales, and they have now a third generation winemaker, Melissa, who is just one of my favorite winemakers in the state. Yeah. She's doing amazing things. I mean, her Petit Verdot I love, and she's made wine around the world, and she came back to Maryland because she saw the potential here too, and she saw the value in her family legacy. So those are the stories that really just fill my heart, because it's like, this is real. There's something really amazing here.
Yeah, we've got a good number of the multi-generational stories. You've got Bordy, you've got Catoctin Breeze, you've got Fiore with Tony now, you know, in charge of producing a lot of the wines. And there's some incredible, I just got a preview at Fiore of some incredible good old-fashioned Italian style wines that are coming out. Techniques that are just not common here. Passamento and Pasito, and just incredible stuff. So yeah, it's nice.
Authentic.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's totally authentic. So to have that and to be able to highlight that, and I think back to all the great stories we've had over the years, the siblings at Old Westminster, and just so many good stories, which they don't matter if the wine's not good, but they really sweeten it because the wine's great. And then you've got these great stories on top. And, you know, thinking about Sugarloaf and their transition there, what the McGarrys, McKennas, et cetera, set up there and then turned it over. It's really amazing what's happening.
Yeah, and I mean, how many actual rocket scientists do we have in the Maryland wine industry? We have so many incredibly intelligent people making wine here too, as, you know, second careers, that it's like, it's just mind blowing.
Yeah, I always got nervous when you had Fred and Neil and Ray Brassfield all in the same room. You know, you got these super smart, you know, ex-military science physicists. Like, slow down, guys. Let's make some wine.
Yeah. Speaking of Elk Run, I have a bottle of their dessert wine in my cellar that I'm dying to open. I really need to make an occasion and open it.
It can be our coming out of COVID little. I've collected a bunch of older Maryland wines that I think, by my estimation and talking to folks who taste older wines regularly, they need to be opened.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do it alone. I don't want to do it just.
You know, That reminds me of the tasting that you did with
Yeah.
the age-worthy Maryland wines. I mean, tasting Cabernet Sauvignon from the 1990s over the past 5 years, like that's a really exciting moment too, to realize that these wines are age-worthy. Oh, and for me as a Maryland wine history nerd, I just get so excited thinking about those bottles. If you have the old Maryland wine, let me know. I'll buy it from you.
Okay, look for Regina. She's got some money for you. And you know, I've been collecting for a while, and so I think last year for Maryland Wine Month, I made a little weird display, just looking at my bottles and putting them out on the ground, and took a photo of it, and people were like, "I've never seen that before. Where's that from?" And every time there's a winery that you know, may be retiring, I try to get samples. Chateau Bonita. Does that name ring a bell? You remember them?
Vaguely.
They came in and out pretty quick.
In the 90s?
In the 2000s, and they had a horse on the label. They were a horse breeding facility up in Hartford County. But yeah, all that stuff. And I see we got a note from a good friend, Mickey Parrish. Call me when you decide to open your bottles. I think it's time. Like let's all get our vaccines and get together and unmask and uncork and have a great time.
I'm in.
Regina, what can you tell folks? How can people find this book?
Oh, well, first I have to show off a couple of other Maryland wine books. These are still in circulation. Philip Wagner.
Let me zoom in on that.
American Wines and How to Make Them. I think this was an Amazon buy. Let's see, this one. I think this one was printed in the 60s. So we do have books like this that are still in circulation.
And you should buy them because it's a piece of history.
Yeah, they're really cool books. You know, there's another Maryland wine author who I didn't mention. It's John Adlam. He published a book in 1823, one of the first American wine books, called A Memoir on the Cultivation of the Vine. So if you ever come across one of those, again, let me know. I would be interested. We have this treasure. Do you recognize this one, Kevin? The original.
That's pretty darn old, Regina.
The original tour book for Maryland's 12 wineries?
That's the 1999 edition. That was the Deep Creek Cellars is Coming Soon book.
Yes.
Paul Roberts. Yeah.
So these are still in existence. This is Kevin's book that he never talks about anymore.
99 cents on Amazon, people.
And then with Maryland Wine and Full-Bodied History, unfortunately, it is out of date because it was published almost 10 years ago. Yeah, almost 10 years ago, but it's still a good read and it's a quick read, and it's available on Amazon and at a few wineries and at local bookstores. You can still see it.
Well, and the good news with a history book as opposed to a tour guide book like mine is the history doesn't change. My book should be shredded and we got to start over.
It's one of my prized possessions.
Let's just check here. Jana Howley just jumped in. Your Maryland wine geekiness is amazing and your enthusiasm is infectious.
Oh, I caught it from Kevin Addicks in 2009.
Infectious geekiness. I love it. And Carol Ann Gartland, who you'll remember from many a wine festival, says, so cool. So yeah, and people are having a great time seeing you. So as you know, just talking history for a minute and then we'll wrap up. We have started a wine club, and I wanted to ask what you think about the significance of it, because we've had a blast pulling together between 6 and 9 and 12 different wines each quarter to go out to folks who've subscribed, but also people can buy it a la carte. We did it because it's kind of a totally unique vantage point that we have, and that folks like you have, having worked within in the industry and tasting around. Anything you can say about the significance? Or
yeah, I think the word curated comes to mind. There is no one in the state of Maryland. There is not a individual or a retailer or a wine writer or a blogger who knows the producers and what they're doing and the wines more intimately than the staff of Grow and Fortify and the Maryland Wineries Association, because you are out visiting every winery and you are tasting most of the wines. No one, I mean, there are probably some consumers out there who have been to most of the wineries in the state, but because you get to do it with such regularity, you truly know vintage to vintage what's going on and where the quality wines are and where the treasures are. And so these wines are literally hand selected by you all, and that gives so much value, because you're getting a good one, and it's probably a wine with a great story, and it's grown here and made here by an authentic person. So I think, to me, that's where the real value lies. Having someone or a team of people who can curate that selection and handpick those wines is really, really special.
Got to get you involved in one of the tastings, because it's the coolest thing ever to just, we've pulled these bottles as we think they're amazing, and then we're excited to share them with other folks on our team, and Joe Fiola, and people just go wild. So it's great to be able to pick that.
That would be really fun.
So Regina, thank you first of all, for writing the book and documenting the history of Maryland wine. It's so cool that happened, and that you did it, and that you've kept that alive. You've kept that alive, because we've lost some people over the last few years. We've lost a lot of history, and it's so great to be able to have that to look back on as memories begin to fade. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
And hope to see you soon. Say hi to everybody at Doden and the family.
I will. Stay safe. Drink good wine.
All of the above, and lots of the safe and lots of the wine. So with that, thank you very much to Regina. And I did want to plug one more time, get onto our website, sign up, subscribe to be a Maryland Wine Explorer. Some incredible wines. We pulled a stunt this last release and got a wine from a winery that may or may not ever open to the public, but they granted us access to the wine, and it's beautiful wine. So we love that. Abby, thanks so much for the comment. Jim, thanks so much for the comment and the graphics. And with that, to everyone else, cheers. Thanks for joining us.